In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 3 books I read in January and the 4th book that I didn't quite finish, but I'm still going to count it as January. If you don't tell the booktube police, I won't either. But anyways, first book I read in January was actually a holdover from last year. It was Mistborn: The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. And like, seriously, I know that everyone basically has read this book at this point. I'm like so behind the times. I actually tried reading this book back when I was like in 8th grade. And I remember disliking Vin like a lot. I just didn't like her at all. The funny thing is, reading it now as a 22-year-old, I loved Vin. She's genuinely one of the best teenage girls I've ever read. And I think it's funny that Sanderson himself kind of critiques his work in Mistborn because of the fact that Vin is like the only girl in the whole book. Like, the rest of the characters all default to male. I really like that he reflects on his work in that way because as a reader, I didn't particularly noticed that Vin was the only girl in this group of men, and I really just focused in on the fact that she was just a genuinely well-written character. And I especially liked how she was very naive but also intelligent at the same time, which is a hard balance to strike. That sort of balance between her being very young but also very precocious for her age, I thought was done just beautifully well. And I guess I probably should have started off with a synopsis of what Mistborn is about, even though I think most people are familiar with it at this point, just in case. The Final Empire is basically a heist book set in this very dark city called Luthadel. And there is this guy called Lord Emperor, and he's just kind of an asshole. And a bunch of people from the peasant class called the Ska decide to come together and overthrow him. I've heard it described as like fantasy Ocean's 11, which I haven't actually seen Ocean's 11, but if that means anything to you, there you go. If I had to give this book a rating out of 5 stars, I would give it it was really good for what it was, and also I loved Kelsey and Vin's relationship, and I think that the ending was really fantastic. Stars out of 5. The next book I read after Mistborn was my Discord read-along book of the month, and that was The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. This book was a revelation, a masterpiece, if you will. I don't think I've ever read a book that has managed to capture the totality of apocalypse and also the sort of prolonged nature of an apocalypse. This book is set after the world has ended, and yet humans are still clinging on. I wouldn't say they're thriving, but they're definitely surviving, and it's just about humanity and motherhood. Systemic oppression is a huge theme in this book, and I genuinely think that everyone should read this book for the way that it portrays oppression and portrays the ways in which it is just completely insidious and poisonous, and the way that when you are oppressed, there is no aspect of your life that is not affected by it. In the way that this world is apocalyptic and that affects every aspect of society, on the individual level, oppression also affects one's identity and the way that they live their life. And this book just did such a fantastic job of portraying that. And I actually bought the sequel, so I'm very excited to get to this. I don't know when I'm gonna get to it. I did my February TBR live, by the way, if you didn't catch that. And I'm gonna be reading The Sheep Farmer's Daughter, The Chronicles of Amber, the whole thing, all 10 books. And I'm also gonna be reading A Wizard of Earthsea. But anyways, back to The 5th Season. I'm gonna be doing a spoilery live stream with Rachel from Shipwrecked Library and Jesse from Another Turning on February 8th. So if that's something you think you would be interested in, definitely join in on that. It's gonna be super fun. I'm gonna be going super in depth with all my thoughts during the live stream, so I won't bore you with the details now, but suffice to say, I think that you should read this book if you haven't read it. If you're a fantasy fan, if you don't like fantasy, this is a book that you should read, and it's just beautiful. The 3rd book I read this month was Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon Maguire. I liked this book. I thought it was good, and I think that it's a very serviceable first book for a series. It's actually a novella. It's something that I think works in its favor. I read Middle Game by Shannon Maguire earlier last year, and I think that this book, Every Heart a Doorway, had the same problem that I had with Middle Game, which is that the characters were beautiful and I loved the characters. I was immediately drawn to them, but the plot itself, I think, kind of took away and diminished my appreciation for the characters, just because I felt it was a little too obvious. And the fact that this was a novella and not a huge 800-page novel like Middle Game actually kind of saved it from being as disappointing as I thought Middle Game was. So just in general, the concept of the series, The Wayward Children, is basically that there's all these kids and they each go through a doorway, but somehow they end up coming back to Earth, and they're basically just super depressed and sad that they came back from their world, because these doorways lead them to the world where they're meant to be. And so for them, coming back to Earth is like leaving their real home, then having to return to this place that never really accepted them. And that concept, I think, is just so poignant, especially for adults like me who grew up reading fantasy and had to grow up and face reality. I think it's just a very relatable theme, and it just strikes a chord with me. It kind of reminds me of The Magicians by Lev Grossman in that way, in that it's kind of like a meta examination of fantasy, the harsh reality of having to grow up and realize that you're never gonna go on an adventure with Gandalf and dwarves, and you're just gonna like grow up and do taxes and go to work. And I think that this series is, I think, in some ways an answer to that, even though in terms of like even though I felt like the plot didn't quite do it for me, I am still going to be reading the rest of the series. I got it for free from Tor Ebook Club, which if you're not signed up for the Tor Ebook Club, like go sign up. It's literally free books every month, and they actually released every single book in this series for free, which is how I'm reading it. So go sign up for the Tor Ebook Club. I mentioned there was a fourth book that I read but didn't finish in January, and that was Dead House Gates by Steven Erikson. Yeah, just some general thoughts about Dead House Gates. So far, it is one of the few fantasy books I've ever read, like ever, where I love every single POV, every single character. Every time there's a perspective shift, I'm never not excited to read that new character. That's pretty rare. There's usually at least one or two characters in a book where I'm like, oh, like this guy again, I don't want to read this chapter. But with Dead House Gates specifically, I have loved every single character, from Felison to Kalam to Duiker to every single one, and definitely I will be making a whole video on it. I have so much to talk about. It's just incredible what Erikson just packs into these books. It's really just been a pleasure to read. And I wanted to give a shout out to my best friend for buying me Memories of Ice. I got the nice little mass market paperback. I read Dead House Gates as an ebook, and I didn't exactly dislike the experience of reading it as an ebook, but I definitely feel like reading it as mass market paperback is the way to go with Malazan, just because it's so dense. Physically, it's just easier to read. And yeah, that is my January wrap up. I was slightly tipsy when I filmed this, so if it's all over the place and like super hyper, that's why. Thank you so much for watching my channel and supporting my videos, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.